At 21, my stepmom lied that I asked ulted her to steal my inheritance. My dad believed her and disowned me. 7 years later, the truth finally came out. My own father disowned me, believing a monstrous lie told by my stepmother. A lie so vile it tore our family apart and left me utterly shattered. 7 agonizing years later, the truth finally emerged, but by then, the damage was irreversible. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. My biological parents divorced when I was 9. They actually had a pretty amicable co-parenting relationship. I spent weekdays with my mom, weekends with my dad. They were always kind, always gentle, and even though it was sad they weren't together, I always knew they both loved me. A few years later, my dad met Gina. When I was 11, he introduced her to me. She seemed nice enough, and my dad was clearly head over heels. He really hoped we'd all get along. Gina had these twin daughters, Emma and Emily, who were 14 at the time. They'd been raised without their father, and honestly, they were pretty immature, prone to public tantrums if they didn't get their way. I'm more of an introvert, so I mostly just observed their antics from a distance. A year later, when I was 12, Dad and Gina decided to get married. Even my mom attended the wedding. I was genuinely excited. You know, a new family member, a new chapter. I really thought Gina and I got along. But then, a few months after their honeymoon, one morning she dropped the bomb. She looked me dead in the eye and said she didn't actually like me. She told me we just needed to pretend for my dad's sake when he was around. And when he wasn't there, I needed to stay out of her way because she couldn't stand the sight of me. Apparently, I reminded her too much of my mom. My heart just shattered. I had genuinely liked her, had truly hoped for a good relationship. And the worst part? The twins overheard everything. They started teasing me, saying my dad didn't love me and preferred them. I remember crying, just absolutely heartbroken, and telling my mom everything. My mom, bless her, immediately called my dad and gave him an earful. But Dad? He just brushed it off, saying my stepmom would never say such things, that I must have misunderstood. The very next weekend, when I visited Dad, Gina was seething. She stayed silent in front of him, but the second he left the room, she cornered me. She whispered, her voice laced with venom, that if I ever told my mom anything about her again, she'd make sure I no longer had a dad in my life. She even threatened to divorce him and take all his money, leaving him destitute, if I didn't keep quiet. I was only 12. I was terrified for my dad, so I just nodded, completely numb. From that day on, Gina made it her personal mission to make my life a living hell. As a kid, I felt completely helpless, forced to endure it silently. Whenever we were alone, she'd hurl the most hurtful insults at me, calling me ugly, mocking my height and weight. I kept hoping my dad would notice, that he'd see what she was doing. But he never did. He truly believed Gina and I had a great relationship, and he'd constantly force me to go shopping or eat out with her and the twins. She'd use his card to pay for our meals, but then she'd deliberately refuse to let me eat anything substantial. I was only allowed soup or dessert, never a main course. I'd sit there, miserable, watching them gorge themselves, crying silently into my lap. Then she'd send me home, hungry, and force me to go straight to bed without eating anything else. Many nights, I cried myself to sleep, my stomach aching, completely exhausted from her relentless cruelty. I was at my absolute wit's end, scared, angry, frustrated with both of them. I started dreading weekends. Every Friday, I'd invent excuses, faking a stomach ache just so I could stay with my mom. My parents eventually noticed. Dad would call, sounding sad that I wasn't visiting. My mom would gently urge me to tell her if something was wrong, but I always kept quiet, still paralyzed by Gina's threats. When I was 14, Dad decided to take the whole family, including me, on a trip to Greece. I really didn't want to go, but my mom convinced me it was a great opportunity to travel. So, I reluctantly agreed. Of course, Gina was all sweetness and light in front of my dad, asking about school as if she genuinely cared. But I saw right through it. She'd subtly tease me, her sweet voice hiding barbed comments that wouldn't make her seem outright mean. For instance, if I mentioned playing basketball, she'd joke that I needed to be taller for that sport, even though I was already pretty tall for my age. Then she'd suggest I focus more on studies if I ever wanted to be successful. The twins would just smirk and call me names like meathead, even though I had better grades than them. Dad would sometimes notice, but he always chose to ignore it. If I ever tried to tell him her comments hurt, he'd insist she was just teasing and I needed to lighten up. Gina would nod along, telling Dad I had no sense of humor. This went on the entire vacation. Until one day, I was trying to enjoy the pool, and she and the twins were relentlessly teasing me about my weight. Something in me snapped. In a moment of pure, unadulterated anger, I lashed back. I told the twins their double chins were embarrassing. Their faces fell. Then I turned to Gina. I told her she shouldn't wear a shrug over her bikini because her huge stomach was still visible, making her look like a penguin. Her face went bright red. She ran back to the hotel room, absolutely mortified. The twins started screaming at me, calling me sexist, telling me how horrible I was. Later, my dad confronted me, his face absolutely furious. He demanded to know if I'd really spoken to my stepmother and stepsisters like that. When I admitted it, he launched into a lecture about how he'd raised me better, how I should never talk to a woman about her weight. I tried to argue, pointing out that they were criticizing my weight, my looks, my height. But he forced me to apologize to Gina, who was still locked in the bathroom, supposedly crying. Gina and the twins made a huge, dramatic show of accepting my apology. When I got home, I told my mom everything. She immediately called my dad again. He tried to blame me for the whole situation, but my mom threatened to call Child Protective Services if Gina ever commented on my weight or looks again. That scared my dad, and after that, Gina never said anything directly to me. However, she and the twins would blatantly ignore me whenever my dad wasn't around, which, honestly, I didn't mind. When I was 16, my mom went away for a few days, so I had to stay with my dad and Gina. Gina complained endlessly about having to cook for one more person. So, on my last night, I decided to make dinner. My mom had taught me to cook from a young age to be independent. When Gina heard I was cooking, she decided to invite some friends over. I prepared the meal, set the table, served dinner. Everyone loved it, praising me profusely. My dad even decided to do the dishes. I went to my room, and from there, I could hear Gina and her friends talking loudly outside my window. Her friends were saying how lucky she was to have such a nice husband and a great house. Then they mentioned how nice it was that I'd cooked for them. That's when Gina went on an absolutely vile rant. She said she couldn't stand seeing my face, that I was so annoying, and she couldn't wait until I turned 18 so she wouldn't have to see me every weekend. When one friend again mentioned how nice I seemed, Gina actually admitted she'd hoped I would fail at cooking so she could blame me for something. I was shocked, absolutely floored. I mean, I knew she hated me, but I was still trying to be polite. As time went on, Gina's dislike for me only grew. During college, if I visited my dad for a few days, usually at his insistence, Gina would completely ignore me. She'd schedule family activities with just Dad and the twins, or her and the twins, leaving me at home. If I woke up late during my visit, she'd yell at me, calling me lazy and inconsiderate, even though I always cleaned up after myself. I knew I had to be respectful to her because my dad would be furious if I wasn't. But despite all my efforts, it felt like nothing I did was ever enough. She had zero respect for my privacy too. She'd barge into my room without knocking, loudly waking me up, or just randomly search under my bed for reasons I could never fathom. She'd refuse to pick up dinner for me, even while getting it for the rest of the family, never inviting me to join them. Still, I kept quiet, tried to stay out of the way, and just spent time with Dad whenever I could. Now, for the main incident. When I turned 21, my dad invited me to visit, saying he had some important news to share. It had been a while since I'd visited, so I felt a bit apprehensive, but my mom encouraged me, saying it sounded like good news. I agreed and booked my tickets. Dad greeted me warmly at the airport, and we drove back to his place. I asked about the news, but he just smiled and said he'd reveal everything during family dinner. When we arrived, I noticed the twins were home too. It had been ages since I'd seen Emma and Emily. They didn't acknowledge my presence, and I certainly didn't acknowledge theirs. That night, during dinner, my dad started. He expressed how proud he was to have 3 wonderful children, how grateful he was for such a loving family. And then he said he had exciting news. The atmosphere was surprisingly positive, and I felt a strange sense of anticipation. He smiled at each of us, even Gina, who had been giving me icy glares all day. Dad then explained that he had recently lost a friend to a heart attack, and it made him realize how precious life was. He'd spoken to a lawyer and made a will. The moment he said, "Will," Gina and the twins perked up, their eyes practically gleaming with excitement. Dad announced he was leaving the house to my stepmom, since she was his wife. Gina beamed with pride, kissing him on the cheek. His house was a 5-bedroom place, huge. If Gina ever sold it, she'd make a fortune. Then Dad dropped the next bomb. He was leaving his entire retirement account and his vintage car to me. This wasn't just any car. It was a classic he'd poured countless hours and money into. It held so much sentimental value for both of us. As he spoke, I realized leaving the car to me was his way of expressing his deep love. As my dad spoke about his pride in me inheriting the car, Gina's expression shifted. That beaming smile morphed into pure discontent. She exchanged glances with the twins, who looked equally displeased. It was clear the idea of me inheriting a significant sum of money and his beloved vintage car had stoked their resentment. Dad, completely oblivious to the rising tension, continued explaining. He said he would leave the joint bank account he shared with Gina to the twins. Since Gina was a homemaker, that money was entirely his. He wanted it equally divided between them, assuring them they'd have money and a house, so they wouldn't have to worry if anything happened to him. I actually thought this arrangement was perfectly fair. I had no issues with it. But the twins? Oh no. They immediately voiced their disappointment, complaining they had expected more. They argued that Dad should leave them his retirement account too, claiming I didn't need it anyway. When my dad questioned their reasoning, Gina chimed in, saying that as a guy, I should find my own way, whereas they were women and needed more money for financial security. My dad reminded Gina that he had already taken care of their college funds, and now they were getting a house and a bank account. They had nothing to worry about. But Gina kept insisting that I didn't deserve so much money. My dad firmly reiterated that his decision was final. I sat there quietly, just observing, as the argument escalated. Then, suddenly, Gina burst into tears. We all looked at her, startled. My dad immediately started reassuring her, saying there was no need to cry, that he'd divided everything fairly. Through her sobs, Gina claimed she had kept silent for years to protect the family, but she couldn't hold it in any longer. The room fell into this thick, awkward silence. My dad and I exchanged confused looks. Despite the palpable tension, he gently encouraged Gina to share what was weighing on her mind. Amidst her dramatic sobs, Gina began to recount how, a few years ago, I had supposedly tried to force myself on her, but she had kept it hidden to protect me. I was stunned, absolutely blindsided by the unexpected accusation. Before I could even grasp what was happening, Gina started elaborating on her fabricated story. She told my dad that after our vacation in Greece, after our argument about weight and height, I would constantly stare at her and attempt to enter her bedroom uninvited. I sat there, frozen in my chair, as she continued to concoct tales. How I would try to barge in every time she took a shower, or get uncomfortably close to her face when we were alone. She even claimed she dreaded having me over every weekend because she feared I would behave the same way with the twins. I tried to defend myself, vehemently denying these baseless accusations, screaming at her for having the audacity to make up such lies. But Gina just continued to cry, acting as if she were the victim. She went on about how as I grew older, I made her increasingly uncomfortable, and on one occasion, when we were alone, I allegedly tried to force myself on her. My eyes widened in shock. The blood drained from my face. My dad looked utterly confused and concerned, his eyes darting between me and Gina, clearly at a loss for words. Gina continued her story, claiming she had suffered in silence for years, afraid to speak up for the sake of the family. I yelled at Gina, calling her a psycho, insisting there was no way I had ever looked at her inappropriately, let alone touched her. Gina yelled back that she was done keeping her silence and needed to expose a monster like me. Then the twins, fueled by their mother's lies, started shouting furiously at me, accusing me of putting their mother through this, using words like rapist and molester. My head was spinning. It all felt like a horrifying, surreal dream. I couldn't believe how a pleasant evening had devolved into such wild, disgusting accusations. I looked at my dad for support, but he just remained quiet, clearly trying to process everything Gina had said. He asked her if what she'd said was true. And Gina? She nodded, asserting that she would never lie to him about his own son, and that as his wife, he should believe her. As I desperately tried to defend myself, my dad asked Gina why she hadn't spoken up earlier. She explained that she feared no one would believe her since I was a minor, trying to do inappropriate things with her as a stepmother. She claimed people would dismiss her words, and she had to bear this silently to protect the family. I was crying at this point, begging my dad not to believe her. I never imagined Gina could fabricate such atrocious lies, especially after everything she had put me through over the years. But Gina's manipulation had successfully strained my relationship with my dad, and he seemed torn between trusting me and believing his wife. The twins, of course, influenced by their mother's narrative, supported Gina's false accusations and screamed at me to leave their house. I yelled back that it was my dad's place, and they shouldn't believe their mother's lies. My dad, amidst all this chaos, looked up at me, and he told me to leave the house. He said I should stay away until the matter was resolved. It was a punch to the gut. Being rejected by my own father, who chose to believe his second wife over me, his son, left me hurt, confused, and utterly betrayed. I packed my belongings and left the home I once thought was mine. I flew straight to my mother's. She was absolutely shocked to see me at her doorstep. When I told her everything, she was furious, ready to confront my stepmom. But I begged her not to. I knew how unpredictable and dangerous Gina could be. If she could concoct such wild lies just to get me kicked out of my dad's house over inheritance, she could do so much more to ruin my life. I couldn't risk having her in my life any longer. That's why I decided to cut off my dad permanently. If he chose to believe her over me, he didn't deserve to have me in his life. Later, my mom told me my dad called her, expressing his shame in having a son like me. He declared he wanted nothing to do with me. Despite her desperate attempts to defend me, it was in vain. My dad's side of the family, completely convinced by Gina's story, even attacked my mom, accusing her of raising a pervert. I can't even begin to fathom the pain my mom felt hearing such vile words about her son. The damage was done. Gina had won. I wish I could say my life immediately improved after cutting them off, but it didn't. Gina and the twins continued bombarding me with vile text messages, threatening that I should stay away from my dad forever. It got so bad that I had to change my number entirely to escape them. Even after that, things didn't get better. Gina's actions left me absolutely terrified of being around any woman, fearing I would be falsely accused again and lose my job, my career, everything. I was scared to meet anyone, to even go on dates. Throughout this agonizing ordeal, my mom stood by me. She believed me, always. I went through severe depressive and suicidal episodes. My mom actually flew in and lived with me for a couple of months, just to make sure I was okay. Slowly, so slowly, my mental health began to improve. I started to rebuild my life. Eventually, I met a wonderful woman named Mara, who brought so much joy back into my life. She has truly changed everything, and my mom absolutely adores her. Mara and my mom mean the world to me, and thanks to them, I continue to live my life with purpose. Just a week ago, I received a call from an unknown number. Thinking it might be Amazon or something, I answered. To my absolute shock, it was my dad. I was stunned to hear his voice after nearly 7 years. He sounded old. When I asked how he even got my new number, he dodged the question and just asked if I was doing okay. I remained silent for a long moment, then just told him not to bother me again, that I had nothing to say to him. That's when he broke down. He started crying. He begged for my forgiveness, admitting how wrong he was to abandon his own son. My curiosity, despite everything, was piqued. I waited for him to explain. My dad then revealed that Gina had been cheating on him with his best friend for years. When he confronted her with proof, she finally stopped hiding it and confessed. She was tired of being married to a pathetic man like him. Gina admitted she had only married him for his money and absolutely despised being with him. And when my dad pressed her further, she confessed to fabricating all the accusations against me because she hated me and wanted all his wealth for herself and her daughters. As you can imagine, my dad immediately divorced her. And because of her affair, she got absolutely nothing from the marriage, despite her lawyers fighting tooth and nail for alimony. My dad said he had been waiting until the divorce was finalized so he could officially reach out to me and apologize for everything he put me through. He expressed his desire to make up for lost time and rebuild our father-son relationship. At the mention of father and son, I couldn't help but scoff. I told him he was no father of mine after how quickly he abandoned me for his wife's nasty, false accusations. I told him I wanted nothing to do with him and that he should stop bothering me. I ended the call right then and there, hoping he got the message. Since then, I've been absolutely bombarded with calls from my dad and his side of the family, people I haven't even spoken to in years. They're all saying my dad has suffered enough and that I'm just making it harder on him. Their messages leave me feeling conflicted. Am I the bad guy for refusing to talk to my dad after he cut me off because of Gina's monstrous lies? Update 1. Natural flow. My initial post got locked, but I'm back, trying my best with spacing from my phone. To everyone who offered support and advice, thank you so much. Your words help me see things so much more clearly. I realized it's not just that I'm furious at my dad for believing my stepmother over me, but also for all those years she harassed me while he did absolutely nothing to protect me. I was just a child, and she blackmailed and manipulated me into silence. I think it's finally time I open up to my mom and tell her exactly what I went through, because I know she'll understand. Update 2. Natural flow. Hey everyone, it's been a week since my last update. For those concerned about my mental health, I'm doing okay, truly. Thank you for your kindness. I actually booked tickets for my mom to come visit me so I could finally tell her and Mara everything. They already sensed something was up. I started by telling them about Dad's contact after all these years, which completely shocked my mom. She asked why he reached out, and I explained. She had no idea he'd even gone through a divorce, and she was absolutely furious at Gina for what she put everyone through. Then, I told them about how Gina would manipulate me when I was just 12. I recounted how she bullied me when Dad wasn't around and threatened to divorce him if I ever told him. I honestly didn't realize how truly traumatic these events were until I began to open up about them, one by one. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down my face. Mara and my mom were crying quietly as well. My mom immediately hugged me, repeatedly saying that I shouldn't have kept this all in and that it was okay to share. I cried for a solid half hour while my mom just held me. Mara also told me that no child should have gone through what I did, and that it was completely fine if I chose never to speak to my dad again, because he should have protected me. My mom nodded, adding that I had no obligations to explain anything to my dad because when I needed him the most, he chose to believe his wife over me. She said the only reason he was reaching out now was because he was lonely and had no family left. That's when it clicked. They were right. My dad, perhaps, never really loved me, because if he did, he would have never believed I was capable of such monstrous things. Since then, I felt so much lighter after finally sharing my past with Gina out loud, with my mom and Mara. I've blocked my dad, and I will continue to block any other family member who tries to interject into my life. I owe no explanations to those who chose to abandon me. Update 3. Natural flow. Wow, it's been 6 months since I first wrote this post, and I can't believe how much my life has changed. I want to start by sharing some incredibly happy news. I proposed to Mara, and she said yes. My mom is absolutely thrilled for us, and we're even considering moving closer to her because the schools are better there. Since both of us can work from anywhere, it makes perfect sense for our future family. Thanks to some amazing advice from people online, I've also started therapy. It's truly helping me feel better, step by step. I'm actively trying to focus on the positive aspects of my life now, like Mara and my mom. They've always been there for me, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful for their unwavering support. The past was tough, agonizing even, but I'm looking forward to a brighter future, free from all the lies and the drama. Thank you for watching.